Gulliver's Travels, A Voyage to Brobdingnag, Chapter 1, Part 2. It was about 12 at noon, and a servant brought in dinner. It was only one substantial dish of meat, fit for the plain condition of a husbandman, in a dish of about 24 feet diameter. The company were the farmer and his wife, 3 children, and an old grandmother. When they were sat down, the farmer placed me at some distance from him on the table, which was 30 feet high from the floor. I was in a terrible fright and kept as far as I could from the edge for fear of falling. The wife minced a bit of meat, then crumbled some bread on a trencher and placed it before me. I made her a low bow, took out my knife and fork, and fell to eat, which gave them exceeding delight. The mistress sent her maid for a small dram cup, which held about 3 gallons, and filled it with drink. I took up the vessel with much difficulty in both hands, and in a most respectful manner drank to her ladyship's health, expressing the words as loud as I could in English, which made the company laugh so heartily that I was almost deafened with the noise. This liquor tasted like a small cider, and was not unpleasant. Then the master made me a sign to come to his trencher side. But as I walked on the table, being in great surprise all the time, as the indulgent reader will easily conceive and excuse, I happened to stumble upon a crust, and fell flat on my face, but received no hurt. I got up immediately, and observing the good people to be in much concern, I took my hat, which I held under my arm out of good manners, and waving it over my head, gave 3 huzzas to show I had got no mischief by my fall. But advancing forwards toward my master, as I shall henceforth call him, his youngest son, who sat next to him, an arch boy of about 10 years old, took me up by the legs and held me so high in the air that I trembled in every limb. But his father snatched me from him, and at the same time gave him such a box on the left ear as would have felled a European troop of horse to the earth, ordering him to be taken from the table. But being afraid the boy might owe me a spite, and well remembering how mischievous all children among us naturally are to sparrows, rabbits, young kittens, and puppy dogs, I fell on my knees, and pointing to the boy, made my master to understand as well as I could that I desired his son might be pardoned. The father complied, and the lad took his seat again, whereupon I went to him and kissed his hand, which my master took and made him stroke me gently with it. In the midst of dinner, my mistress's favorite cat leaped into her lap. I heard a noise behind me like that of a dozen stocking weavers at work, and turning my head, I found it proceeded from the purring of this animal, who seemed to be 3 times larger than an ox, as I computed by the view of her head and one of her paws, while her mistress was feeding and stroking her. The fierceness of this creature's countenance altogether discomposed me, though I stood at the further end of the table, above 50 feet off, and though my mistress held her fast, for fear she might give a spring and seize me in her talons. But it happened there was no danger, for the cat took not the least notice of me when my master placed me within 3 yards of her. And as I have been always told and found true by experience in my travels, that flying or discovering fear before a fierce animal is a certain way to make it pursue or attack you. So I resolved in this dangerous juncture to show no manner of concern. I walked with intrepidity 5 or 6 times before the very head of the cat, and came within half a yard of her, whereupon she drew herself back, as if she were more afraid of me. I had less apprehension concerning the dogs, whereof 3 or 4 came into the room, as it is usual in farmers' houses, one of which was a mastiff, equal in bulk to 4 elephants, and a greyhound somewhat taller than the mastiff, but not so large. When dinner was almost done, the nurse came in with a child a year old in her arms, who immediately spied me, and began a squall that you might have heard from London Bridge to Chelsea, after the usual oratory of infants to get me for a plaything. The mother, out of pure indulgence, took me up and put me toward the child, who presently seized me by the middle and got my head in his mouth, where I roared so loud that the urchin was frightened and let me drop. And I should infallibly have broke my neck if the mother had not held her apron under me. The nurse, to quiet her babe, made use of a rattle, which was a kind of hollow vessel filled with great stones and fastened by a cable to the child's waist. But all in vain, so that she was forced to apply the last remedy by giving it suck. I must confess, no object ever disgusted me so much as the sight of her monstrous breast, which I cannot tell what to compare with, so as to give the curious reader an idea of its bulk, shape, and color. I had a near sight of her, she sitting down the more conveniently to give suck, and I standing on the table. This made me reflect upon the fair skins of our English ladies, who appear so beautiful to us only because they are of our own size, and their defects not to be seen but through a magnifying glass, where we find by experiment that the smoothest and whitest skin looks rough and coarse and ill-colored. I remember when I was at Lilliput, the complexions of those diminutive people appeared to me the fairest in all the world. And talking upon this subject with a person of learning there, who was an intimate friend of mine, he said that my face appeared much fairer and smoother when he looked on me from the ground than it did upon a nearer view when I took him up in my hand and brought him close, which he confessed was at first a very shocking sight. He said he could discover great holes in my skin, that the stumps of my beard were 10 times stronger than the bristles of a boar, and my complexion made up of several colors altogether disagreeable. Although I must beg leave to say for myself that I am as fair as most of my sex and country, and very little sunburned by all my travels. On the other side, discoursing of the ladies in that emperor's court, he used to tell me one had freckles, another too wide a mouth, a third too large a nose, nothing of which I was able to distinguish. I confess this reflection was obvious enough, which, however, I could not forbear, lest the reader might think those vast creatures were actually deformed. For I must do them the justice to say they are a comely race of people, and particularly the features of my master's countenance, although he were but a farmer, when I beheld him from the height of 60 feet, appeared very well proportioned. When dinner was done, my master went out to his labors, and, as I could discover by his voice and gesture, gave his wife a strict charge to take care of me. I was very much tired and disposed to sleep, which my mistress perceiving, she put me on her own bed, and covered me with a clean white handkerchief, but larger and coarser than the mainsail of a man of war. I slept about 2 hours and dreamed I was at home with my wife and children, which aggravated my sorrows when I awakened and found myself alone in a vast room, between 200 and 300 feet wide, and above 200 high, lying in a bed 20 yards wide. My mistress was gone about her household affairs and had locked me in. The bed was 8 yards from the floor. While I was under these circumstances, 2 rats crept up the curtains and ran smelling backward and forwards on the bed. One of them came up almost to my face, whereupon I rose up in fright and drew out my dagger to defend myself. These horrible animals had boldness to attack me on both sides, and one of them held his forefeet at my collar. But I had the good fortune to rip up his belly before he could do me any mischief. He fell down at my feet, and the other, seeing the fate of his comrade, made his escape, but not without one good wound on the back, which I gave him as he fled, and made the blood run trickling from him. After this exploit, I walked gently to and fro on the bed to recover my breath and loss of spirits. These creatures were the size of a large mastiff, but infinitely more nimble and fierce, so that if I had taken off my belt before I went to sleep, I must have infallibly been torn to pieces and devoured. I measured the tail of the dead rat and found it to be 2 yards long, wanting an inch. But it went against my stomach to drag the carcass off the bed where it lay still bleeding. I observed it had yet some life, but with a strong slash across the neck, I thoroughly dispatched it. Soon after, my mistress came into the room, who, seeing me all bloody, ran, took me up in her hand. I pointed to the dead rat, smiling and making other signs to show I was not hurt, whereat she was extremely rejoiced, calling the maid to take up the dead rat with a pair of tongs and throw it out the window. Then she set me on a table where I showed her my hanger all bloody, and wiping it on the lappet of my coat, returned it to the scabbard. I hope the gentle reader will excuse me for dwelling on particulars, which, however insignificant, may appear to groveling vulgar minds, yet will certainly help a philosopher to enlarge his thoughts and imagination, and apply them to the benefit of public as well as private life, which was my sole design in presenting this and other accounts of my travels to the world, wherein I have been chiefly studious of truth without affecting any ornaments of learning or of style. But the whole scene of this voyage made so strong an impression on my mind and is so deeply fixed in my memory that in committing it to paper I did not omit one material circumstance. However, upon a strict review, I blotted out several passages of less moment which were in my first copy, for fear of being censored as tedious and trifling, whereof travelers are often, perhaps not without justice, accused. And we'll go on with Chapter 2 in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I love you. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.